Hello, everybody. I'm Nicole.
I'm Lindsay.
And I'm Sarah, and together we're the co-founders of Whale Tales, a living library of cetacean stories.
Today, we have a very special guest. Lindsay, who is it?
It's Christina from Norway, a whale watch naturalist and who also manages the Orca Channel over there. Surprise, we're doing more Orca stuff for Orca Awareness Month. Who would have guessed?
So sit back and enjoy as we dive right in.
All right. Hi, Christina. Thank you for being here and dealing with our exciting time zones. Why don't you tell us a bit about you and your whale watching and your whales and basically everything, because we don't know and we're excited.
Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Krisztina Balotay. I'm originally from Hungary, which is a landlocked country, so it's kind of interesting that I have ended up here in the north of Norway. But I really like whales, and especially orcas, since I was basically 5 years old. And of course, the first time I have seen the movie Free Willy, which I think have changed for a lot of people. And I have been doing some research in British Columbia with Orca Lab, studying acoustics about the orcas in that region, the northern resident killer whale population. And after that, I was lucky enough to get an opportunity to come to Norway and work as a whale watching guide. And since then, I'm stuck here, which is already over 6 years ago now. I'm helping out with the research as well in the area to Norwegian Orca Survey, mainly with the long-term photo identification project, because as you know, I'm spending like almost every day, if the weather allows us, for 3 months with these animals. So I have an enormous amount of pictures, and these can be utilized to identify the animals and also to track the populations and kind of get an idea of who is coming back in which winter, on how many times, how long they spend here, who has a calf, and all these kind of things.
Yeah, those are the things that are so cool, and it's such a thing that we don't think about here because, as we've talked about before, our orcas here were the first ones that were cataloged, and so this is where it started. So having to start from kind of scratch with cataloging and IDing and understanding pods and matrilines and all of that stuff is just sounds so cool to me.
Yeah, in Canada, it's a little bit more easier and sophisticated because over there you can have the family relationships and everything in between the orcas. In Norway, I think it's because of the number of the orcas and the population size, like it's over 1,500 animals as per the estimation. I think the family relations only can be distinguished by biopsy samples. So, for example, even if we identify an animal, or Norwegian Orca Survey identifies an animal, it's not possible to know who is the mother or who is related to who. Some of the animals are always seen together. For example, there is 3 fully grown males who probably have been brothers, or like I said, I don't know the family relationships, but they have always been seen together in the past few years. So there must be some sort of relation between them.
I have many questions. I have so many questions. I'm so excited. So just for our listeners, because we've spent a lot of time whenever we talk about orcas talking about the different ecotypes, and you, Christina, have probably heard us go on our rant, as our listeners have, about speciation, and we're not going to get into that today, but just to kind of orient our listeners, when you speak about this population of over 1,000 orcas in the North Sea, what ecotype are you looking at?
Yeah, so technically, in Norway, during the winter time, the orcas are gathered here because of the herring, because the herring comes close to shore to overwinter, and therefore they are supposed to be fish eaters, and actually the North Atlantic type 1. But these orcas are unique, and Norway is unique from this perspective that sometimes here they are mixing the predation behaviors, which means that there are some orcas who have been identified during the winter time going after herring, and in the summertime when the herring is further offshore and they happen to be at the Norwegian coastline, they occasionally take some seals. But there are also a small seal eater population in Norway who are only going after seals, but those ones are normally not the ones I'm watching in the winter time, because the winter ones who gather in big numbers in the Norwegian fjords are fish eaters, and they come after the herring. So this is unique, and I think it's not even recorded anywhere else in the world that a fish eater orca would go after a seal. It's only unique for Norway. Sometimes, but not all of them. Some of them, yeah.
Yeah, it's so crazy. It's such a weird thing because coming from here, they're so specific. But I know that everywhere else they're not. Like in Western Australia, they like chase beaked whales and eat squid and like all of this stuff
and
all
rays
at the same time.
And turtles.
Yeah, and so like they're much more generalist, which makes sense as a large predator. But here they're just so strange, and yeah.
Yeah, in Australia, I would be very curious about those transients. Like you said, they're going after seals or whales or squids or whatever. But that's like a transient range, so they're not going after any school of fish or anything. So here it's more like a mix between the fish eating or the
yeah. That seems to be kind of the
behavior.
line, like mammals and other stuff, non-fish stuff, and then fish. Like those are the kind of the two.
Yeah, like schooling fish versus large prey. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and last winter I was not lucky enough to see it, but some of our friends have seen a group of orcas going after a harbor porpoise. It was not confirmed the ID for the orca, but that also happened. So it also could be it was just a seal eater who happened to be in the area and found the harbor porpoise alone, or if it was a fish eater and nobody knows why I went after the harbor porpoise.
Yeah, well, we know some of the southern residents. There's been stories of southern residents playing, not in a nice way, with harbor porpoises, teasing like a cat would. So, but then of course not eating them. So who knows? Like killer whales do all sorts of random things all the time. So you never know what you're gonna get.
And I can absolutely support that because we very often see them playing with little auks. This is just a little bird, and they are very similar to puffins, but much smaller. And they are very clumsy on the water when they have to take off and when they have to fly. And sometimes you can see, especially young orcas, and they chase them or grab them or even drag them underwater, but then let them come back up. But poor birds are so small, and you can see the fear in their eyes when the orcas are getting closer.
Yeah, we get auks here too, or up north here. Yeah. So you mentioned that the orcas that you have primarily come in the winter to feed on the inshore herring. Do people know where they go in the summer?
Yeah, they actually follow the herring and the fishing boats. So the herring goes offshore to lay the eggs and feed. And the orcas normally can be found this time of the year not this time of the year, but right after the winter in the middle range of Norway, further offshore. And during the summertime, some herring comes closer to the shore, still not like in the winter time, but a little bit closer. And then there's when you can have sporadic sightings about the orcas, for example, in July, around Åndenes or around Stö or the Lofoten area. And after that they start to migrate basically further north and eventually end up in the fjords of Tromsø, Skjervøy, or wherever they are going to end up this season. We don't know that.
And so when you see them together, like if you're out on a sighting, what is, because I know you were saying that, like right now, because of where the research is at, it's really hard to identify family dynamics, whether or not these orcas actually follow similar family dynamics to what we see in the Pacific is a whole other thing that we don't know yet. But what is the average group size when you actually spot a group together?
I would say between 10 and 15. Sometimes I see smaller groups and sometimes I see bigger. It's less common that I see bigger ones, like up to 20 or 25, but I think the average size is around 10 or 15.
Is anybody doing biopsy research on them?
Yes, Norwegian Orca Survey is working on biopsy sampling, and they are trying to get some information about the genetics. And it's a really nice project because they are only making biopsies from animals, which is already identified. which means that it's actually easier to have some sort of family relationships in between them, not just biopsying random animals.
So when you go out, like, however, for many times, like almost every day, if you can, during the season, November to January, like every day, like you recognize, like, do they stay? Do you see them like this a couple of times a week sometimes, or is it just like you never know who you're gonna get?
Well,
day to
I
day?
would say we never know who we're gonna get on a daily basis, but we see the same individual animals very often, sometimes multiple times a week, and sometimes, for example, if we are talking about fully grown males, they disappear for a few days or even for a week or a week and a half, and then they come back. And it very depends on their location of the fishing activity, because in Norway the orcas are getting kind of lazy and they are following around these big huge commercial fishing vessels, and when they put out the net and they are fishing for the herring, then they are all over the place. And it's actually very funny to see that they are just lying next to the net and waiting for the waiting for the easy catch. So you can tell how smart they are, and at the same time also how lazy they are. So we never know who we're gonna get, but we recognize individuals, and sometimes we have an animal who is in the area for like a month or a month and a half, and it can happen that we see him every day or we see her every second day or whatever is the frequency, but we can see them multiple times.
What is the fisher people's reaction to that?
To the orcas?
Yeah.
Well, I think they already got used to it, and I think they are less disturbed about the orcas than the people, because in Norway there is a lot of people, obviously, who comes here to see the animals, and they are also going close to the fishing boats, which sometimes can be a little bit disturbing to the fishing activity. So I would say about the orcas, they are also fascinated about them, and sometimes you can see that if they have a moment and they take a photo or they take a video, I'm sure they have a very nice view from these fishing boats, a little bit higher up, and you can see all these orcas are all around the nets together with the humpback whales. It must be fascinating. So I think they have a first raw cinematic experience with them when they are around.
Yeah, you've had some photos that we've got on our website of the orcas with the fishing boats, and they're absolutely incredible. And they're just so excited. They're just like jumping through herring. Like, look at all this fish.
Yes, they very often spy hopping and slapping their tails. And even I have seen one of them was doing pectoral fin slapping. So they kind of try everything to get the attention or to get the free bite.
It's nice to hear, though, that that the fishing organizations don't seem to mind too much, and at least with the animal impact, because I know here in BC there can sometimes be a much more adversarial relationship between fishing operations and on both types of orcas, whether it's the residents or the bigs, and also with the bigs prey, seals and sea lions. So that's actually really nice to hear.
It can be that there are problems, but the problem is usually when the orcas are too pushy, and sometimes it happens that they end up in the net, and that can be a problem. But personally, I have never seen such a thing live. I just heard stories about that. And so I wouldn't comment on that. But if the orcas are behaving and they are just going after what's falling out, or actually trying to get something out of the net, and they are not inside the net, I think they have already learned to kind of coexist together. Let's put it that way.
So before we continue, I just want to go on a quick tangent about the other animals that you see. You mentioned humpbacks. So are humpbacks, and I think you've seen pilot whales, they're in your season as well? Is that correct?
The very last season, I haven't seen any pilot whales. The year before, which was actually the 2019-2020 season, there was one day, and I think the pilot whales have chosen the darkest day in the whole year, the darkest and the most cloudy and the rainy and everything. So it was just like at nighttime. And all of a sudden, we haven't seen orcas that day. We only saw humpback whales, and the humpback whales were surrounded by like, I don't know how many, but maybe 300-400 pilot whales. They were everywhere. And I was I wasn't sure at the first time if it was like a play behavior, but then I talked to some people, and pilot whales are in big numbers, so they can outnumber even a humpback whale. And maybe it was not a play for the humpback whale because they made kind of heavy sounds, heavy breathing sounds, and it looked like after a while, they tried to get away from the pilot whales, but they were like everywhere. And like I said, the orcas were not in the area, maybe because of the pilot whales that day. But it was super crazy how many you can see all at the same time. It was crazy. They were everywhere. Calves, together with moms, very young ones, also males, and they were all over the humpback whale. Some of them were even trying to position themselves on the top of the humpback whale. That's what gave me a little bit of an impression that maybe this is not so fun for the humpback whale.
Oh, that's so cool. Are there any other marine mammals, whether they're cetaceans or not, that you see frequently in your season?
Yes, we can sometimes see fin whales. I wouldn't say frequently because before the very last season, I have maybe seen them once or twice. But actually last season, I'm not sure it was because of the less boat traffic, because we had restrictions in the country to enter due to the virus. But we have seen quite a lot of fin whales. I would say once a week, and they are very shy. You can see them from very, very far away because they are huge, but they are very shy. And last year we were very lucky because I think, like I said, because of the few number of boats, they were not so shy, and sometimes we could even see them from 20-25 meters, and it was quite amazing. There was one day which I remember, and they were even porpoising in the water. They were a little bit further away, but when you see such an enormous animal jumping out of the water like a dolphin, it was pretty amazing.
That's so cool. I just, as much as I want to see fins and blue whales in general, seeing them do something like that would just, I don't even know, just blow my mind. Because it's just, it's so against, they shouldn't exist in general physically, physics-wise, but it's just, and then being able to do that, what? How is this a thing?
Yes. It looks like, for me, especially last season, it looked like that all the cetaceans doesn't care about gravity anymore, because we have seen even orcas breach a lot more time than usual. And I'm sure you remember the breach photo that I took at the very beginning of the season last year, and that was also a fully grown male orca, and he just jumped out of the water like if nothing has happened, with all his big body, over 6 tons maybe, and it looked so effortless that I was shocked.
So when you're there in the winter, so this is November to January in Norway, so it's dark all the time regardless of the rain, and freezing. So what?
Oh no, November is still good. November is still good. you can still see.
It's clearly very different than the experience that most of BC's researchers and naturalists get, because our orca season here is the summertime, and since we're both in the northern hemisphere, we're talking about the same seasons here. Winter is gross and dark, and summer is beautiful. So what's it like being on the water? How many hours of daylight? What's the typical, do you get wind cancellations? What is that experience
like I said, everybody wants to come in November because November is still light, so you can be out 3, 4, even 5 hours, because it gets dark towards the end of November around 2, maybe 1. December can be quite dark. The darkest day of the year is the 21st of December, so that means that we go out around 10:30, which is not fully daylight yet. It's like a grayish daylight, and then it gets to the lightest point of the day for 1.5, maximum 2 hours, and then already starts to go back to dark. So it's 2 hours of whale watching, and you shouldn't expect sunlight or anything. It's 5 o'clock in the afternoon in the autumn in Europe. And if it's snowing, then it's even more darker. If it's not snowing, then you can get actually really nice colors, because the sun doesn't rise above the horizon, and that creates this pink coloration, or sometimes orange. So that is actually very very beautiful. But yeah, 2 hours. And wind cancellations, some seasons are good, some seasons are not so good. It depends on. Yes, we do get. So I would say weekly, at least once a day. Once a week, we have to cancel on an average because it's crazy weather, it's too windy, or the wind direction is, for example, from the north, which is very not ideal, especially if the orcas are heading that direction. Then we have to cancel. But we can end up with better seasons, which means that even for a month there is no cancellation. It also depends on the flexibility of the people and the operators, because some operators like to go out even in worse weather. Some operators prefer to stay in if it's very, very windy, or if it's more windy than a certain level. So it depends on that as well.
All of this makes so much more sense when you start to think about, because we get questions from listeners and from fans on our socials about just why don't we know more about other populations? And when you start to think about the logistic, we have identified many times that the populations in BC have been studied for now, it's 60 years, and we're still only at the point where we know this much because it's been going on for that long. In places like in Norway, the studies have been going on for I think it's 15
No,
years?
it's
20?
even more. I think a little bit more than 20. I mean, there are some researchers who are doing this for a long time, and of course they provide some data to Norwegian Orca Survey. So overall, I would say it's a little bit over 20, maybe even 25 years that they are trying to study and understand them.
But then you think about still the typical day that a researcher, so not a naturalist, because naturalists have very, very strict restrictions around how long they can spend with the whales in BC. But a researcher with a researcher's permit could be spending in BC waters upwards of 10 to 12 hours a day with populations of orcas, for also usually the season is about 5 to 6 months or so, sometimes even longer, depending on when the orcas arrive. So I just think the perspective of that, if you think about a third of the amount of years studying, but also really a third of the amount of time per year that gets devoted to that study.
It's so hard. And you think about the photogrammetry that they're doing here with the drones and stuff, and you need it to be light. You need the sky to be light, and you need the water to be light, because otherwise you're not going to be able to see these animals are black on top. Yes. So what are you going to see?
Yes, you can see
black water.
And I don't know how well drones fly in the wind.
They do. Some of them end up in the water, but we also try it. And just to comment on Lindsay's black water and the black animal, you can only see the saddle patch, and when they are already close to the water, so it's kind of hard. But I mean, you can try, and you can end up with very nice weather, and then you have clear images. But that's the reason why what you just explained, the amount of time of possibility when you can actually conduct the research and collect the data and the pictures and everything, why we are still, I would say, in a, how to say this, we are still in a much less sophisticated way of the research for the photo identification and the family relationships and the genetics and everything about the Norwegian killer whales, because it's also, compared to BC, a much larger area, and they are much more spread out. They travel much more, and sometimes they are very hard to be accessed.
And there's more of them.
Yeah, and they don't behave in the nice ways that we do, of oh, look, there's one, and it's always with the exact same three, so we obviously know who they are. So when you were talking about you doing the photo ID and helping the Norwegian Orca Survey, so are they have the ID numbers? Do you have nicknames for them? How are you identifying them, colloquially, let's say?
Yeah, so they have all of them has a code which conducts 3 numbers. It's NKW, and that stands for Norwegian Killer Whale, and then a dash and 3 numbers. And some of them has a name and some of them doesn't have a name. I don't actually know based on what one of them gets a name or the other one doesn't, but it's actually quite a few who has a name. So compared to, for example, for the Southern residents, which all of them are actually named, it's like nothing. But last year, on the breaching photo, the one that was NKW151, and I actually sent a picture to Eve to Eve saying that I have seen a whale, and I just referred to him as Jumpy, and Eve said that she will keep the name. So since then he became Jumpy.
I love it.
That's a pretty good name, yeah. That's like, we have a humpback calf here whose name is Pop-Tart because his first summer all he did was breach, so.
I think that's all of the, like, I mean, again, I want to nerd out really hardcore on these, but keeping our listeners in mind, I think that's the biggest questions that first come to mind when I think about the population, which is probably a good opportunity to transition us to my favorite segment of the podcast. Christina, are you ready? It's time for Fun Flipper Facts with Christina. Christina, since you are our special guest today, you get to share with us and our listeners your favorite fact that you've learned about these Type 1 Atlantic Norwegian specialty unique orcas.
Yeah, so the Norwegian orcas are quite funny from this perspective. I'm sure all of the orcas are acoustic creatures, so I think this would work basically everywhere, and I have also tried it in Japan, but they really like if you make sounds to them. I mean, normally we whistle to them, and it happened multiple times, especially the last season with less boats in the area, that when they hear you whistling to them, they come close to the boat and they answer you. So they just float next to the boat and make sound out of their blowhole right as a reaction right after when you are whistling to them. And it's just so fascinating to make a connection. And when you have people on the boat, you explain a lot of things about the orcas, and then they see you whistle to them and they come closer. And of course, because we are out almost every day for like 2.5, 3 months, some of the orcas are recognizing you, especially the boat and the sound of the engine. So sometimes you can see that when they see you in a distance, they are already approaching the boat, and if you start whistling, they are just lying next to the boat and listening to you. And like I said, sometimes they answer, and I found it fascinating, and it's an amazing experience. And 2 years ago when we went to Japan, I said to my partner that we have to try this, and actually the same thing happened with the orcas in Japan, that we were whistling to them and one of the females were just lying on the surface, and she answered to us. It was incredible. It's something worth to try, maybe even in BC. If they are in hearing range, I'm sure they are going to react.
That's
cool. So amazing. Wow. Huh.
Well, thank you. That was an excellent Fun Flipper fact.
But the Norwegian orcas really like when you are loud around them. So they like to ride the waves, and there was one day when I was screaming because they were so close, 2 males behind the back, and they were porpoising behind the boat, and the higher or the louder I was screaming, the closer they came. And every time I screamed, they surfaced, and I tried that even after he was breathing, I screamed another one, and then he came back up. So they really like the sounds, if you make sounds around them. That's very obvious from the Norwegian orcas, that they really love all sorts of sounds, and they surely will have a reaction if you try to get their attention for a few seconds.
Wow, that's so cool. Huh. Amazing. Well, I guess we'll just have to go and find out ourselves.
Oh, yes.
One day when we're allowed to travel again. So you've told us so many stories already, and of course on our website we have tons of amazing stories from you from the last, I think, 3-4 seasons. But is there any story that any stories that you really stick out in your mind that you want to share again, that maybe you've already shared with us or maybe you haven't?
There's 2 or 3, I don't know. Yeah, there was one which happened like 2 years ago, which, the orca, it started kind of sad, or at least I thought it was sad, because that the orcas mourn their calves if they are dead, and there was a female who was carrying a calf around, and I was like, what happened? It looked like the calf was not moving, and it was strange. We tried to get a little bit closer to see what's going on. And then the female, I think, somehow felt, that I was worried or I had concerns about what is going on. and she actually approached the boat from the back with the calf. And when she arrived, the calf all of a sudden, like in 1 second, he or she, I don't know, but the baby was jumped off from the mother's head and then swim around in a little circle. So it was actually alive. But which was so remarkable for me is that the female really came close to the boat to show that the baby is alive. And it wasn't, because from a distance I couldn't see. I was just, oh my god, something must have happened, because this is not normal for a calf like this to just lie on the rostrum of the mother. And then she came very, very close, like 2 meters from the boat, and then she showed that the calf is alive. And then after a minute she left together with the calf, and I was calm that that it's alive. So it was that was something I will never forget.
Yeah, that's interesting behavior, and who knows, I don't know if the calf was sick, or I don't know, maybe just sleeping. Who knows how?
Yeah, maybe it was just resting a little bit, because we had a fishing boat in the area like a few minutes before for like an hour. So it very often happens that after feeding around the fishing vessels, you can tell that the calf is already totally full and they cannot even dive. They just float on the surface while the rest of the group is diving and waiting for them to come back up again. So probably it was just tired and took a rest,
Wow.
which took longer than normal. And we arrived and we saw it, and I don't know, of course I have no proof of that, but it surely looked like that the mother felt that I'm worried what's going on, and then she approached and showed that everything's fine. It was very...
That is incredible. I'm just, that's so cool. It is. It's one of those things that, like, you know, when we think about the stories that we like to read, or the ones that just kind of, that hit us the most, it is when you know that you're making a connection with that animal who lives such a completely different life than you, and that really that we can even imagine, especially in the case of these orcas that we're still learning so much about. That is very special. Thank you for sharing that with us.
No worries. I'm sure they I mean, especially last season, basically the only permanent boat who went out every single day together with them to film for the Orca Channel, or sometimes we had a few guests, it was us. So it was really like, you know, they surely recognize us. They surely recognize my voice, and especially when I'm whistling. So it's kind of like we go watch them, and they also come watch us a little bit, because they are like, oh, I know you. You are my friend. And you can sometimes see on their behavior that there are boats, but that of course is not the behavior. It's not never the behavior of the boat, but there are some boats with drivers who they prefer not to be close to, and they prefer other skippers who they prefer to be closer to. And you can sometimes see their behavior when they see a certain type of boats, they keep a distance, or when they see another certain type of boats who they actually like, then they will go much closer than for the previous one. So it's like we have individual orcas who we see multiple times in a season and we can recognize them, but it's a two-way street. So they can also recognize us, they can also recognize our behavior, and of course they have their own preferences.
Ugh, yeah, that sounds incredible. So before we get into our CTA, do you want to tell us a little bit about Orca Channel? Just briefly, you guys, something you started this year. Was it because of the pandemic?
Yeah, halfway, I would say. More or less, maybe a little bit more than halfway with the pandemic. It was kind of something we had to do if we wanted to bring the orcas to the people, because they were not allowed to come here. But we will continue this year as well, because we get a lot of positive feedback. And even though if the country is going to be open, and hopefully a lot of people like you can come and see them for yourself in person, we still would like to show it to as many people as possible. So we will continue to film with a weekly episode, which is going to be narrated, so you can learn about them. And we try to include also individual animals in the Orca Channel episodes, so people can get more attached to the series. And if they are lucky and we have a lot of resightings of that certain animal, then basically they can follow that animal throughout the whole season. It's not just about a group of orcas, but let's try to make it a little bit more personal. We try to show all sorts of aspects of their lives, like feeding, resting, evening feeding, which was actually not evening, it was just dark, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And then And then, yeah, interactions with the humpback whales, socializing. We got a lot of jumps and spy hops on camera, which was quite amazing. And yeah, everything.
Amazing. Well, before we wrap up, we always like to finish things off with something, a call to action or a small action that our listeners can do to help preserve and protect orcas or the ocean around them. So if you've got one to share, that would be awesome.
I'm actually very sad to see each and every winter that the Arctic is getting more and more polluted from plastic-wise. I mean, when I started to work here, I have never seen plastic bags or anything floating around in Arctic waters, because this is still considered to be a pristine environment where these things doesn't come. And in the last few years, I have seen quite a lot of plastic trash floating around the orcas, which we always take out if we find one. But if I can share just one thing, and that's the easiest, which I think anyone can contribute to, is to try to take your trash to a trash can. And let's not dump anything in the water, because it can harm, and sometimes it does harm these animals. So it's very important to try to keep their environment as clean as possible.
Yes, definitely. That leads in nicely to Plastic Free July, which is starting again, of course, I think tomorrow when this comes out. So we've always shared some tips, and you can check out our social for more tips. It's complicated in a pandemic, but less complicated than it was last year. So there's always things you can do to reduce your plastic, and also just make sure that you're disposing of all of your trash safely.
Well, I think that that probably will bring us to the end of our episode. Christina, thank you so much for being here with us today. It was awesome. And just on a personal fan note, I'm so excited to get the chance to just pick someone's brain about these populations that we as in the three of us, don't know much about.
No worries. It was very, very nice to talk to all of you.
We'll bring you back if you're open to that. We would really love to hear our listeners' thoughts on this or any episode. So please visit our website, whale-tales.org, and find links to our various social media handles so you can drop us a line.
You can also tweet at us directly. I am FHG07. Sarah is Sarah K. Given, no H. And Nicole is Nick F. Cann, Cann. Christina, you can find on Instagram at Krisztina Balotay, and also Krisztina Balotay Photo on Facebook. Plus Orca Channel you can find on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
You can also head to our website to subscribe to our podcast, check out our merchandise, and learn about supporting us and becoming a patron. And while you're there, you can read over 1,000 whale, dolphin, and porpoise stories. You will definitely find some of Christina's there.
Yeah, that's whale-tales.org. Tales like the story, not tales like the animal.
And of course, if you have seen a cetacean like Christina has, we would love to add your story to our library. Click the share link on our site, contact us on social media, whale-tales.org, or email us a voice memo, and we could feature you in another episode of the podcast.
Thank you again for listening and for supporting us. We will be back on the last Wednesday of next month with a brand new episode.
Thanks, everybody, and have a whaley great day.